morning, everyone. My name is Karina, and this is my partner Alaadin. And today we'll be talking about the Berlin Brandenburg Airport project and the lessons learned. So our agenda for today is, we'll start with the background and then cover the project timeline. Next are the key stakeholders. Then we will move on to our lessons learned. We have 9 in total. Next is the conclusion, and then we'll have question and answer session.
So we'd like to start off with the background. So as you all know, the project commenced in 2006. It's an airport built to replace the Berlin Tegel Airport. The original idea started in 1990 when Germany was reunified. And the idea was to have an airport to unify both east and west, and that's when the brainchild started. And then the project was delayed, and in 2006, the project commenced. So the planned opening was in 2012, and it was postponed several times since then. Currently, they plan on opening in 2017, maybe not. They're not so sure yet. The airport failed the ORAT safety inspection in 2011, and that's why it didn't open initially. So ORAT stands for Operational Readiness for Airport Transfer. It's obviously a rough translation from German, and it was coined as Germany's $6 billion embarrassment, since it's currently over budget and costing them $16 million a month just to keep the facility from going to a state of disrepair. So two airport directors later, and the airport may open in 2017, and it may not, as I mentioned earlier. They're going to see what happens. As for the project timeline, so the construction began in 2016, and the original opening was going to be in 2012. And the change of management, which is a key turning point, is in 2012 as well. That's when they failed to meet the opening, and it was a big embarrassment because a lot of important political names were invited in Germany, and they viewed it as a failure, and a very big failure at that. So a series of scandals happened from 2013 all the way to today, and the possible opening is 2017. They haven't announced because they don't want any further embarrassment regarding it. So just to put some pictures to the names we're going to be mentioning. So from your left to your right, Klaus Wowereit was the Berlin mayor, the governing Berlin mayor at the time of the project commencement, up until, I believe, December 11th, 2014. In the middle, we have Mr. von Gerhard, and he was the architect, and I believe still remains the architect. And to the far right is Rainer Schwartz, and he was the CEO of the company that was building the Berlin Brandenburg Airport, and is still building, but however, Mr. Rainier was dismissed due to the scandal. So our first lesson has to do with a constant scope. So this airport has an issue of vision. So from the previous slide, you know that on the left we had a politician and an architect as well as a CEO. They all had sort of a clashing vision of what they wanted to do with the airport. So at one point within the airport, they just decided to add a second floor to the terminals and to have more space for malls and whatnot. So clearly that presented a challenge in terms of what the scope was and in terms of the size of the airport. Initially, it was only supposed to house 17 million passengers a year in and out the airport. Then it changed all the way up to 22 million mid-project. So you can see that the changing scope caused them a big problem. So not having a constant scope means that you also need a methodology to deal with not having a constant scope and not use a waterfall method of production, and instead using more accurate methodologies of planning out and budgeting. So as you can see, the moving target caused a lot of issues, and so the increased accountability for unfinished work between the architect and between the manager, which was Mr. Schwartz and Mr. von Merken. What happened was they had not only did they have an issue of vision, they also had an issue of artistry. So the architect, whenever he viewed that his artistic vision of the project was being sort of compromised, he took it very personally, and there was always a fight in the newspapers. As for the lesson 2, as it pertains to lesson 1, it was changing goals means changing tools. So as we all know, if the goal isn't standard, if it's not a solid target that you aim to hit, you need to have a different tool in order to reach that goal. So, for example, a standard project may use a Gantt chart, and as we researched this project, they were really big into the use of the Gantt charts and those standard project management tools in order to get the job done. However, it proved inadequate due to the fact that in an airport setting, not all the components have to be done in order for the airport to open. So an airport could open with only 2 terminals, not 3 or 4, and an airport could open with only 1 floor in the mall area of the terminal. So using a Gantt chart or these inadequate tools is not such an effective thing, so we suggest that maybe using a PERT chart or more adequate tools in order to go through with the construction of this project. As for lesson 3, it pertains to Brook's Law. So Brook's Law means that adding people onto our project later on does not necessarily mean the project will finish any earlier or that it will finish on time at all. This lesson really pertains to software in general. So software projects tends to go over budget, and they never are finished on time, generally speaking, from my experience at least, and from my research. So Brook's Law is generally, like, just to put it in English terms, if 9 women are pregnant at once, that doesn't mean they're going to have the baby in 1 month. That's what Brook's Law really pertains to here. And what happened in this project was they kept on adding more people on it, more contractors and subcontractors. In the end, they had something like 50 contractors and about 120 subcontractors working under them, which caused the communication issue. So that was the knowledge area they were really lacking. Not to mention time and cost. All of those areas were like very lacking in terms of what they could have achieved. However, they didn't, just due to the lack of communication. As for the 4th lesson, they needed an early warning system, which they currently didn't have due to the lack of communication they had and the political prowess of, for example, the mayor versus the chancellor of Germany at the time. There was a lot of conflicting ideas, and what occurred was they didn't actually have an early warning system to tell them that the airport was off track. So in the end of it, it was 55 miles of wire running through the airport, and since there were a lot of contractors and subcontractors, they couldn't tell which wire was what. So in engineering, we know that heating wire, data wire, and the alarm system wire, which is what went haywire in this case, which caused them to be late, shouldn't be together. So the heating wire shouldn't be next to the data wire, since that itself is a safety risk, a fire risk, not to mention the fact that it wouldn't work later on. So what happened was a lot of them were tangled, right? And they didn't have an early warning system, and the high power stakeholders, which I mentioned earlier, the 3 main ones, couldn't have had any insight into that, despite the fact that they were blamed due to the number of subcontractors and contractors. Now, sure, the conflicting vision had something to do with that, but we believe that in addition to the conflicting vision, some sort of communication warning system or some sort of 6 months break, as the PMOs at that time suggested. We need a 6-month break. Let's just stop construction, regroup, talk to each other, see what happens then. That didn't occur due to political pressure, and that's why we don't have an early warning system, that the project was failing. So usually in engineering projects, we don't just wait for the safety inspection to show up to test the alarm system. In this case, that's actually what happened. The alarm system was not tested beforehand, and that's why it went haywire. So this feeds right into our 5th lesson learned, which is the contractor/subcontractor communication. So what we needed in this case of the project, or what we learned from it, is that we needed a standardized and searchable method of communication so that we could audit it later, as well as hold people accountable that should be held accountable. So we had Siemens and Bosch, and they were the 2 main contractors on this project in terms of the wiring. Now, to their credit, both of them have claimed that they have done their parts, and they have, but the issue is that they have around 120 subcontracts between the 2 of them and other companies that don't have to do with the wiring, and they couldn't really communicate with each other. Therefore, the 55 miles of wire that I said was laid out within the airport got tangled up and mixed up, and wasn't according to safety standards. So it was a sort of thing where you have a heat pipe under you, and as well as a data pipe, and they were obviously the other team wouldn't know that this was a heat pipe, and they wouldn't know that it was a data pipe. To them, it was just wire. So to help the contractors and subcontractors communicate with each other, similar projects within this industry, for example, I know from back home we had an airport construction project with a lot of contractors and subcontractors, and they had a formal system, and you could only actually talk to the contractors and subcontractors via email, which was monitored by the ministry. In that case, what happens is they regularly audit them, and they see where the mistakes happened, and if they happen, they hold everyone accountable. As for the 6th lesson, I'll hand it off to my colleague so she can talk to you about it.
So the 6th lesson is early audit. So the audit that was held at the airport was booked too close to the deadline. And as a result, the management could not make too many changes. And they failed to react to the circumstances in a timely manner. So the audit was happening over the entire project, not parts of it. So what they should have done is they should have looked at each one of the departments separately and had spent more time actually doing their research. Moreover, they should have researched also past projects that could relate to the same one, such as the Düsseldorf airport, for example, where in 1996 there was a fire that killed 17 people. And next is lesson 7, so communication management. So communication is integral for any good management. And sometimes even if the tasks are very technical, they still all depend on communication. And in this case, a lot of the managers, they were just overlapping tasks. That's why a lot of things needed to be redone. For example, they forgot to do insulation on the pipes. And as a result, some walls might have to be destroyed. So due to the fact that they're mostly wasting taxpayers' money currently, they need to be very transparent with that. And to help prioritize their stakeholders, they can use a RACI chart or use a power to interest grid. Apart from also weekly meetings that they constantly hold, they should have daily Scrum meetings just to update everybody on the progress in a very timely manner. Next is lesson 8, project manager empowerment. So frequently in this course, the project managers have made many suggestions that were just plainly ignored. And Mr. von Gerken as well as Mr. Schwartz have been known to have frequent arguments with their project managers. And it is very important to listen to the advice of the project manager. And moreover, it is important for the project managers to actually have the power to actually make their system, to actually have enough power to enforce the vision of the project management department. So, next is risk management. So assessing the risk is the most important part in this case, and they have not evaluated the risks in a timely manner, and they have not come up with the ways of mitigating the risk at the project inception. So because of that, there was a fire protection system failure, and a lot of the problems actually originate from that. So because they decided to put fire extraction pipes under the ground, which contradicts the normal hot air behavior, the whole fire system was pretty much failed, and as a way of mitigating, they decided to hire 800 low-paid workers with cell phones to call one another whenever they see fire. And yeah, they actually did that. And another thing is prior to actually bringing up that solution, they haven't checked that the cell phone network was actually very bad in the area. So they wasted even more time and money.
Just to clarify, the safety inspector said no.
So in conclusion, we have covered 9 lessons learned that are actually very essential and that could be common in various industries. And they could actually be happening as well as in the private sector as well as in the public sector. And we think that this case of Berlin-Brandenburg Airport could be actually a great case for people to learn and to realize what mistakes should not be made. Thank you.
Perfect. Very good. Excellent, excellent job. And perfect timing. We've got 10 minutes for questions, starting now. Judges, just jump in if you got a question.
All right. I first commend you. That was an excellent presentation. I even like the way it was laid out, very clear. Looks like we had 5 years of all kinds of trouble. We're not clear on the goal, and therefore how can you plan, how can you schedule, communication, a lot of chaos. My first question is, the next 5 years, so they're planning to open potentially in 2017, what has management or project sponsors, what have they indicated they're going to do differently?
Well, the airport isn't going, the airport, there's a small chance that the airport might not open at all. However, they indicated that there's going to be a change of management, and they did do that. So what they're planning on doing is just stopping with the changes and just setting up the goals. So they just froze what the goal was, and they're going to aim towards that. Right now, currently, from what I've researched, what they're going to do is that they're going to remove some of the wiring and just start all over in terms of the wiring system, which goes under the Berlin-Brandenburg airport. But in terms of changing of management, I don't think they're going to do that again until 2017, should the 2017 deadline be not met again.
So it sounds like they talked about some of the tactical things they will do, but have they addressed any of the higher level management or things that they've learned from the past?
Well, in terms of change of management, or in terms of tactics that management uses?
Either.
Well, in terms of changing in management, what they did was they fired Mr. Schwartz and then the CEO following him, and now we're on the third guy. So, and in terms of project managers, they've replaced 12 of them. And the mayor lost a lot of popularity in terms of that. And I think Mr. Von Merken also quit, and he wrote a book about it. But in terms of but in terms of the change of strategy, I think that so in terms of what they're going to do strategically to change it from a management, not engineering perspective, I believe what they will do is go exactly with the lesson one, is that not change the scope, which was their initial problem. And I believe that Siemens and Bosch have like some sort of, I guess like a mechanism to communicate with each other in terms of the wiring. And to their credit, they have been doing very good jobs. However, it's just so hard to do with 120 subcontractors, sorry. So, and I'm pretty sure the subcontractors also have subcontractors.
Very good.
So I have a question. So on the theme of communication management, I found it interesting how you said that the project managers and the stakeholders and the project sponsors were always arguing. And sometimes, in the real world that can happen. Sometimes it's about ideas or different priorities, maybe performance issues with the PM. Maybe they're not too fast, too slow, not communicating correctly. Let's pretend you were PM number 13 that now came onto the job. What would you do differently knowing all 12 of these before had some issue? And you don't really know what it is, but you've got to come in here and do a great job. What might you do differently so that you don't argue with them?
I would suggest a change in CEO. No, I have a reason for that, though. I would suggest a change in CEO due to the fact that we have a very eccentric architect, and we have to follow his vision, since he is the architect and it is his brainchild. However, given the fact that I would be the 13th PM, I would also know the intricacies and the politics from the PM before me. Now, as I like to say, it's bad luck 13, so I'd hope to be PM 14. So personally, I would honestly map out the stakeholders and try to see which ones have the high power and just tend to them and try to bring them to negotiation tables beforehand, before we start the construction. And just like PMs 1 through 12 suggested, I would implement the 6-month stop construction policy in order to regroup and see what we're going to move forward with, because I believe that was a very smart decision that was ignored.
Nice. And I wonder, if somebody would go in the 13th time and just really ask the question, how could we do this even better? What is it that we're not doing that you're looking for that's getting you so upset?
Yeah.
And that might be something that the 13th PM might want to ask. Good stuff.
Very good.
So, and you called it Brook's Law, but it's also known as another term. So do you know what the other term? I'm doing the professor thing here. See if you know your terminology. So Brook's Law, but as PMs, we tend to call it something else. So do you know what it's called? Stumped ya. Do I get points?
I don't even know.
It's called crushing.
Oh.
Right? When you just apply other resources to try to make it go faster. Did everybody know that? Yeah, crushing.
It's good to know.
That's the professor.
That's a professor.
Very good. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, go right ahead.
Thank you. You mentioned something about the early warning system. What did you mean? Did you mean that, like, early warning system in the context of the fire alarm itself, or just as a project level, more like, procedures and policies, etc.?
What we meant by an early warning system is that the project manager or the management of the project itself as well should not need to wait until 2011, up to 7 months before project completion, to know that the project isn't working. That's just way too late. At least they should have an early warning system to know a while before in order to adjust. And even if they did have an early warning system, I know the project would have been delayed. However, it wouldn't be 5 years too late. It would be late maybe a year, maybe 2, but not 5. That's what we meant by an early warning system.
So lack of monitoring and a feedback loop within the...
Yeah, and a lack of safety inspection earlier on. They should not have to wait for the safety inspector to know that the fire alarm does not work.
Okay, I'm gonna pick on the last row, because you guys haven't raised your hand once.
Sitting by the coffee.
Can I get a question from the back row? There's a reason they're sitting in the back row. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Have you looked at the organizational chart of this project?
Yes, yeah. We've
So
seen,
what was-
yeah. What you mean,
How can you change it?
well, they did change it, all of it.
No, but the reporting structure, like how everything works.
You mean as in a matrix?
Yes.
Oh, so,
Is the matrix functional? Is the project plans?
well, so this is public and private. So, I mean, I doubt they're gonna change the way they run their government, because the government did have oversight over this project, and a lot of it at that. And the company isn't exactly a private company. It's built airports within Germany for a long time, so it's not exactly new to the business. Granted, they haven't built airports the size of Brandenburg, but they did have similar projects. But in terms of the matrix structure, they changed the names on it, but they never have changed the actual structure of the way it works. What I would do is I would flatten it a little bit and make sure that there are a lot more project managers at the top levels in order just to get the project done, maybe within the next few years.
And who is responsible for approving drawings?
Approving drawings
Issuing approved drawings to the site.
in terms of architecture or in terms of the site
In
itself.
terms of specifically to the issue with the wires, because these comes as a package. So these drawings, as you said, there's violation of code.
Mhm.
So if someone would stamp these drawings, they must know that this is violation of code. Unless you have separate drawings that nobody's actually overlaying all these together and see on paper that this, works. So,
Well, actually, that's exactly what
so
happened.
wouldn't that be the architect?
Well, the architect doesn't have an engineering viewpoint on it.
But who's leading the consultants?
Siemens and Bosch. They were the contractors responsible for laying the wire. And what happened is that there was a heating cable, like a pipe under it, right next to a data cable and right next to the fire alarm cables. And the heating cable would cause enough heat, to actually burn through the wire.
So everyone would issue separate drawing, but nobody would actually overlay the drawings.
I'm sure they did over them, yeah. But that's the issue, though, that they didn't respond to it. Because there were so many subcontractors and there were so many contractors that they had a communication malfunction, which caused the layover. How they have this tracing paper and they lay over pipe. That's what they didn't see due to the fact that they had so many subcontractors and contractors.
So I think team building, is that something you would look at?
Definitely trust
It
falls.
seems to me this team never really got a chance to storm. They never really got to work together.
Well, they didn't, but they do have it now, though. I mean, I know, there was a change of management in terms of the company that's building the airport, but Siemens and Bosch are still very much on this project, and they do have a chance to rectify whatever past mistakes were made by the airport's management. So I see that as a future point of, that's another lesson learned, I guess.
Is any of these issues with the wires related to the addition of the malls or the addition of the second floor? Is any of this related, or is just those two separate things?
Well, from what we researched, we don't have enough information to answer that, but from my own knowledge, I'm pretty sure that was part of the case. But from the research, these the schematics aren't publicly available, so we don't know if this addition of the second floor was the issue, or was it that they expanded the airport from 17 to 22 million capacity by 2020. So they probably added another terminal. So that could have added to the problem. I agree.
Very good. We have a question, second row center, yes.
Really great presentation. I just wanted to check, in your opinion, who should be the one who would be defining the objectives? Because I think that there are all sorts of issues, but I don't think that any one particular person clearly identifies
So what you mean, like?
So the question is that we have a number of stakeholders,
Mhm.
but who is the top ones that should be coming up with the objectives? And then who has the power to help coordinate this in order to clearly define the objectives for everybody involved? And then how are we going to look at the issues that are actually we're having problems with, so that we can identify it, so that we can start to implement it and focus on, moving the project forward.
Should I answer from a project inception standpoint or like 2015?
From the first one.
From the beginning, it should have been Mr. Schwartz's job to clearly define an objective. So his vision to increase the capacity as well as to add a lot to the airport is one of the main root causes. The architect could be to blame. However, the architect is still an employee of Mr. Schwartz. He's tasked with designing an airport, and sure, he might have an artistic vision, but in the end, he's just an employee. So in my opinion, I would put the blame, not solely, however, mostly on Mr. Schwartz, due to the fact that he had the power and he was the one responsible. In every organization, we hold the CEO or the head or the president of a country responsible for the said actions of his employees. And in this case, he failed to listen to his project managers and he failed to set a clear vision. His project managers can identify the risks and they can tell him about the risks, but should he fail to do so, the project manager's job is done at that point.
Wow, very powerful statement to make during an election.
Okay, go ahead,
Yes, I wonder, actually, this question is for you as much as to the presenters. Would an agile process help from the beginning to avoid these hurdles that the project came in?
What do you guys think?
I feel like we throw agile around a lot as a solution to every problem, personally. I don't think that in terms of building an airport, agile is actually very effective. We cannot build Terminal 1, test it, run it through, then expect it to do the same thing for Terminal 2, 3, 4, and then expect to be done on time and on budget. I believe a waterfall process, since this is a process that we're very familiar with, and in terms of airports, we're very familiar how to build them and what goes wrong with them usually. So most airports are actually, from what I've seen and from what I've researched, often go over budget and take longer to build than initially anticipated, mainly for economic problems. And the other thing is that airports take years to build. So this one was incepted in 2006. The construction started, but the request for proposal started in 2005. So let's just say 2005 to 2012. It's a 7-year project. That's why a lot of things can go wrong with it. But since we know how to build airports and we know how to do it well, and there are a lot of companies specializing in it, an agile method would do us no good. A waterfall method where we finish step by step and test then would be a lot better.
Can I follow?
Follow up?
Yeah, why I'm thinking, because my understanding there are so many repeated processes along the way. So if we finish the early processes and if you have finished product, we can benefit from the output to have it an input for the next cycle to ensure that we have a better success. What do you think?
Well, in terms of building testing, then not doing the testing again, is that what you mean?
No, I mean, for example, if I want to build I don't know, like a bunker or like a roadway or something, if I have 5 roadways, if I can build the first roadway and review that, ensure that it's working fine, what went right, what went wrong, and then with that an input to the second roadway, probably I will have a better roadway. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I agree with you. But however, in an airport project, that's why I said agile sometimes takes too long. Because in an airport project, what happens is you can't build one roadway and wait, right?
Well, it's taking a long time anyway.
Yeah, I know. But usually they're building all 5 at the same time. Like, yeah, you know what I mean? They don't.
We're almost out of time, because we're actually just over noon. We're a minute behind. But I do want to take an opportunity for 1 or 2 more questions. Go ahead.
Okay. Firstly, I immensely impressed from the way he presented. He is overconfident. Good luck, guys. My question is, the main scope is to build an additional terminal, right, as extension. One challenge for this type of project is the operation. What measures the project manager and the team have been taken to not to affect the daily operation of the airport? The daily operation.
I
Since
believe
it's an existing airport, right?
It's not.
Brandenburg, no, it's Willy Brandt.
Oh, it's my own.
Tegel, there was a proposition to expand Tegel. I don't know what happened with that though.
Okay, another question, last question, yes, Ian.
All four of the presentations have dealt with public projects, and you've had the opportunity to hear your three competing teams describe some of the challenges there. One of them is kind of highlighted, in my opinion, on the screen right now. If you were looking to do this project again, what is it about a public project that has the potential for the greatest risk, the greatest failure?
The reason why public projects have a lot greater risk than private projects is due to the fact that we have a lot of newspaper attention to them, and the public tends to pay attention to them. So in a private project where like the public doesn't have any information regarding it, Mr. Woolry wouldn't even be a stakeholder. Why? Because he's a public politician, meaning he runs for re-election and he has his party to answer to. So we add an extra complication that's not necessarily the most value adding in this situation. And when that happens, even though accountability to the public is one of the cornerstones of democracy, it still adds an extra complications which we can't deal with